Hello and welcome to the webinar, Data Triangulation, Combining Assessments Effectively. So just allow me to introduce myself first of all. I'm Claire Dunn, International Manager for GL Education. And today I'm going to do a hopefully fairly brief overview of our core assessments, because there's a number of recorded webinars available on our website which go into those assessments in more detail, but I will set the context and go over those. And then I'll just talk about some ways that you could triangulate our data to reveal more about the students within your school. So for those of you who aren't familiar with GL Education, just to let you know that we work with international schools across the world, and that's across 6 continents and well over 100 countries now. Our core assessments, you can see on the screen in front of you now. So this really summarises our philosophy, if you like, towards educational assessment. So we believe in understanding, therefore measuring, the ability of students alongside their attainment and then also their attitudes. So that's really to identify any barriers to learning. And we feel that those 3 components alongside each other combine to give you the whole pupil view. So setting the context of attainment in line with ability, so that you understand the attainment compared to that individual child's ability, for example, is much more powerful than simply having attainment data on its own. So I'll go through CAP4 progress test series and new group reading test and then pass for the next 10 minutes or so before I go on to show some examples of how you can triangulate the data across those 3 bodies of assessments. So CAP4, what is it? You may be familiar with it. You may already use it in your school, or you may not be familiar with it at all, but you may have heard of it. It's an assessment of reasoning that helps identify pupils' developed abilities and therefore their likely academic potential. It measures 4 key components, so 4 batteries as we term them. So that's the level to which a student thinks with words, the thinking with numbers, thinking with shapes, so that's non-verbal reasoning, and then the spatial reasoning is thinking with shapes and space. And there is a very strong correlation, not surprisingly, between spatial reasoning and success in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and maths. In front of you is an example of indicator grades produced by CAP4. So as well as, I'm just going to flick back one page, as well as seeing a standardised age score against the 4 batteries that you see in front of you, and the verbal reasoning in the international school context, we tend to see quite a suppressed score because of students' language development with English, and they may only be 2 years into learning English perhaps. So in that case, you would expect to see a suppressed verbal reasoning score against those other 3 batteries. So as well as that information, that data, and you can look at sample reports on our website, and we'd be happy to send some to you if you want to drop us an email at the end of this webinar. Then you'll also have indicator grades shown there, so an example here. So that gives you a probability against each grade for GCSEs, IGCSEs, MYP, diploma, IB diploma as well. It also gives you a profile of each student as well, and that's their learning profile, so how that student is likely to learn best, and also implications for teaching and learning as well. So there's a wealth of information that CAP4 gives you. As I said, this is really just a very quick taster of what each assessment is about, just so that I'm setting the context for talking about the data triangulation towards the end of the webinar. So CAP4 is the measure of potential. The measure of attainment is done by our progress test series and also our new group reading test as well. So focusing on the progress test series, it provides, or they provide, attainment levels, year-on-year progress across English, maths and science, Also, very importantly, an analysis of the topics that students have understood well, and also the weaker areas of their understanding. And we also include in our reports very focused, targeted suggestions on what the student could do next as well. So the analysis supports the teacher's CPD. So the progress tests cover English, maths and science. They are distinct assessments, so you can either administer all three with your students or two or one out of the three, but they are standalone. And there's a range of reports available for whole cohorts for the individual students and also reports for parents as well. So you've got different reports that are tailored towards each of those different audiences. So an example of progress test maths on the screen in front of you. And progress test maths covers the 4 areas that you can see on the screen in front of you. So it is a skill-based assessment. Whilst it is based around UK curriculum content, we do have a number of schools who don't run a UK curriculum who use the progress tests because they feel that it assesses the learning of their students, so their attainment of their students accurately. Progress test English covers English skills, so that's spelling, punctuation and grammar, and then it also covers reading comprehension, both narrative and non-narrative. The progress test English is more of a progress tracker for English as a curriculum area. For reading ages and understanding the difference between reading and comprehension, I'd refer you to the new group reading test, which I will mention shortly. And the final progress test is progress test science, which reports on physics, chemistry, biology, and also working scientifically. And these progress tests, they are primarily used in digital format by international schools, but they are also available in paper format as well, and they are marked using an online marking tool within the school. If you're administering the progress tests online, then you would need a computer for the students, so that could be a laptop or a desktop computer, and a pair of headphones as well. And then the scoring is done automatically, instantly, as soon as the student has finished the assessment. So you get very quick, almost instant reporting back from these assessments. They're designed to be done at the end of the academic year, and they take in the region of an hour to an hour and 15. So there's an example here of the progress test in maths report. So you'll see the names of the students down the left-hand side, and then 4 columns in, number of questions attempted, which is important to look at, standardised age score. Now, standardised age score is the key metric of our ability and attainment assessments. So this is an age-adjusted score. So 100 is the average 50th percentile score, 59 is the lowest, and 141 is the highest standardised age score. You'll also see a column there called Overall ST. That stands for Overall Stay 9. So rather than using standardised age scores, if you want to use a slightly more simple metric, which is numbers of 9 down to 1, then you can use Stay 9s instead. So 9 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. Our assessments also automatically track progress. So if a student has taken the previous version of progress test in maths, say the previous year, and you've used the same student ID when you're uploading the student details, when they take the assessment this year, it will pick up that they've already taken progress test maths, and it will show the progress. You see on the screen in front of you an extract from a report which shows the implications for teaching and learning. So rather than you needing to do all of the legwork on interpretation of the data, then we support with that by providing a commentary which gives you clear targets of what you could do next with the student, or what the student could do next. And this graph shows the progress. So this is a student who has taken 2 progress test maths, one last year, one this year. And the dot on the graph, blue, so this is a graph showing a small class of students. Where the dot is in the pink area, that shows a student who has made below expected progress. In the white is average progress, and the green is above average progress. So all we're doing here in these points shown in the graph is plotting the previous standardised age score with the most recent standardised age score. And where that dot falls in the graph will show you the category of progress that the student has made. For any questions on this, please do email after the webinar. This is essentially the same data, but it's shown in tabular format instead. So the standardised age score of the student, last time they took progress test maths, this time what was the standardised age score difference, and then therefore the progress category. So that just covers off progress test, math, English and science, because the reports are consistent across the 3 different subjects, or broadly consistent. The new group reading test is a reading and comprehension assessment. It takes approximately half an hour, 30 minutes to administer. And it measures the difference between reading and comprehension levels. So we find in an international school context that it's not uncommon to find that a student reads very, very well, and it's easy to assume that the student is understanding just as well as they're reading. But in actual fact, when you look at the difference between their reading and their comprehension, it can be quite significant. Likewise, you can have some students who seem to comprehend quite well, so they can, in a test format, they can answer questions, they've got enough about them that they can work out the answers. But then when you look at their reading ability, actually they don't have the vocabulary that they need to have to fully access the curriculum. So they're 2 different examples, but they will show up within the new group reading test reports. Okay, and so that's a quick overview of the progress test, English, Maths and Science, new group reading test, and I'm now just going to mention the PASS survey. So that's the survey which measures student attitudes, so identifies the barriers to learning there at the bottom. Not surprisingly, we know that countries where students have got stronger beliefs in their abilities, then they perform better in maths. And I think that's universal to life, isn't it? If you believe that you're going to achieve something, then the chances are that you are going to achieve it, or you've got a much better chance of achieving it. This was taken from an OECD study in 2014. So it's important to understand how much students actually feel within themselves that they are going to achieve. How much do they feel they're capable of? And the PASS survey will measure 9 attitudinal factors. So feelings about school, through to perceived learning capability, through to confidence in learning. So that's a measure really of resilience or perseverance. Attitudes to attendance. So I'm sure you don't really have attendance issues as such, but it's very insightful to look at whether a student actually wants to be at school or not. Response to curriculum demands, so that's showing you how well suited the curriculum is through the eyes of the student for them. So how do they feel that the curriculum is really matching their needs? PASS is a 20-minute survey. It's designed to be administered once a year as an annual survey across the whole school. So it's very interesting to see the differences in trends year on year, and between year groups and between gender as well. So it's very interesting to see data building up over the years as well, and see how the trends on attitudes change within your school. And fascinating to see down to individual student data, how a student really feels about themselves. So we do find that in international schools, there does tend to be more of a suppressed score on the perceived learning capability with girls, for example, than boys. And the results from the PASS survey are shown at different levels. So you can see an example here of what we call the level 1 analysis. So this is out of a whole survey, the bigger picture, and you have the percentages data and the percentile data. So percentages show across that cohort or across that group of students the percentage scores for each of the 9 factors, and then the percentile sets that in some context. So it's benchmark data against other schools within the sample group, so that you can see whether, for example, the perceived learning capability percentage score of 60%, is that good or is that bad compared to other schools? And when you see it set in percentile data, 7.5 means that it's in the bottom 7.5% against other schools. So that is a low score. Whereas the self-regard as a learner, you can see is 73.4. So you're actually in the top 25% against other schools. But it's important to have the percentage data so that you can see longitudinally that your attitude scores are increasing. And it drills down to individual student data so that you can see the scores for each of the 9 factors for each individual student who takes the PASS survey, and therefore then, focus sort of targeted interventions for those students. Okay, so that's just setting the context. That's our core assessments, and they're the core assessments that I'm going to mention when I talk about learner profiles and data triangulation. So before I look at a couple of case study examples, just to illustrate really learning paths and measuring learning potential, just how important that is. So this is a student's ability, so their learning potential, and this is measured by CAP4. If you understand the learning potential of the student, then it gives you a benchmark against which to measure their attainment. So our attainment, our standardised attainment data from the progress test and from new group reading test, yes, it's critical to have in its own right, and it will track the progress of the student year on year, and it will track against the norms for a student of that age. But the additional dimension of having ability data alongside is that you then begin to measure the student's attainment, not just against norms for their age, but also against the individual's ability level, so that you can see whether there's a gap, which is shown there by the arrow. So is there a gap between the attainment and the potential? And of course, the earlier you can identify that, then the more time you have to do something about it whilst the student is with you in school. So how do you reach the full potential? How do you help the students reach their full potential? Well, if you have an informed picture of each child for the best possible start at the school, so at the beginning, and that could be using our baseline assessment, for example, and if you identify the issues and you put in place effective interventions, and then checkpoint along the way, so have key assessment points where you can see whether there is a difference between the ability and the attainment of the student, then learning and progress should be on track with the right interventions. And our combination assessment reports will help you with data triangulation. So they will help particularly with the comparison of ability data from Cat 4 against the attainment data from the progress test and new group reading test. So there's an example of that on the screen in front of you. So if you can see the second student down here, Daniel Brown. Daniel had a Cat 4 verbal score of 123. But when he sat progress test English, his standardised age score was 93. So it highlights there that there's a discrepancy. There's a discrepancy between Daniel's ability and his attainment in English. So that is certainly something that you would want to investigate further. So this is probably a coasting student who may need more challenge because he's not currently meeting his full potential. Now in front of you, so this is really the data triangulation part of the webinar. I've pulled together two examples of students, and they're fairly typical profiles of students that I come across when working with international schools across Southeast Asia particularly. So this is Daisy Allen, and she's in Year 4 or the equivalent. Her Cat 4 scores are, again, fairly typical of students that I see, possibly a little higher. So her verbal score of 90 against the non-verbal, quantitative and spatial scores of 136 and then 115, you can see that she's got quite a suppressed verbal score here. So Daisy may have only been learning English for a couple of years, so she's still got quite a long way to go until her language is really allowing her to access the curriculum fully. But you can see how able Daisy is as a student. Her non-verbal and quantitative scores here are very high, well above average, 136, and her spatial is not quite as high, but is still above average. And when you start to compare this to the attainment data, you'll see that Daisy scored 95 in new group reading tests. So if you compare that to her verbal ability score, actually she's doing pretty well. She's attaining in line with her ability as it stands. But we know that this is a student that with the right language intervention, she is a highly able learner. So she is likely to accelerate in her attainment over the next few years if she receives the right support with her language. Her English attainment, again, pretty much in line. If you compare that Cat 4 verbal score to her progress test English, Daisy appears to be working hard. And when you look at the maths and the science, again, they are pretty much in line with the quantitative and the spatial scores of Cat 4. So Daisy does seem to be applying herself well. But I would certainly look hard at that new group reading test score, which shows a stay 9 of 7 for reading. So Daisy is a student who is reading well. If you listen to her read, she would probably be reading pretty fluently. But stay 9-2 of comprehension illustrates a statistically significant difference between those two stay 9s. So Daisy is not really understanding what she's reading. So immediately, this is an area to flag up and certainly investigate further. And that's where putting teacher judgments alongside is absolutely critical, possibly further diagnostic assessments as well. So then when we looked at the third component, the pass attitude scores, feelings about school are very, very positive. So Daisy has very positive feelings here about school. Perceived learning capability, though, is the biggest concern out of those 9 attitudinal factors. So Daisy doesn't feel very capable herself. She doesn't feel like she's going to achieve. She doesn't feel able to achieve. So she's quite down on herself, one way of thinking about it. Learner self-regard is a longer-term measure of the same thing. So perceived learning capability is more a shorter-term measure. Self-regard is a longer-term measure. So learner self-regard here isn't quite so low. So it may be that there's something particular at the moment that Daisy's studying that she's really struggling with, and this is affecting her self-esteem, so her perceived learning capability. So again, this is something that you would want to investigate further and possibly put in place some coaching so that Daisy has specific goals which you can see that she's achieving on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, so that she can look back at the log of all of the things that she's achieved. Preparedness for learning is pretty high. Attitudes to teachers, very, very positive. Daisy's clearly got a good work ethic, so she can see the reasons for coming to school and working hard. Confidence in learning. This is a student who perseveres, doesn't give up, she'll keep going. And attitudes to attendance is high, as is response to curriculum. So no other key concerns, but this is a student who we can see without the right language intervention, she doesn't really believe fully in herself, and those two components over time really could affect Daisy reaching her full potential. So it's important for you within the school to be aware of these things. Let's look at an example of Joe. So Joe Patel. So Joe's a secondary age student. So he's in year 8, grade 7. And you can see that Joe's scores are a fair bit lower. So Joe's scores are a fair bit lower than Daisy's. He has a score of 99 verbal, non-verbal of 110, quantitative 108, and spatial 120. So Joe has a spatial bias. When you look at his spatial score compared to his verbal score, you can see that there's quite a difference here of 21 standardised age score points. So Joe's a student who is more likely to achieve through flowchart, diagrams, more kinesthetic learning. Joe may appear to be a little bit disorganised perhaps at times. He may be a student who forgets pen, pencil, his book. He may appear to daydream in lessons. These are just common characteristics of a more spatially biased student. When you look at Joe's attainment scores alongside, you can see that whilst he has quite a similar standardised age score to Daisy in the new group reading test, so Daisy's I think was 99 from memory and Joe's is 95, so just around that average point. You can see with Joe that actually that first number there, the number 3, indicates a below average level of reading. So it may be that his vocabulary is not quite up to where it should be, but he hasn't performed as well as expected within the sentence completion part of the new group reading test. But his comprehension actually is just above average in Stay 9-6. His English is, again, broadly in line with his verbal ability, just a little bit below, but 4 standardised age points is not going to be significant. But maths, this is a student who is underachieving. So Joe's quantitative score was 108, but his maths attainment score is 95. So there's certainly something there that needs investigating because Joe is not reaching his full potential. And again, in science, 10 standardised age score points, 110 versus 120 ability. This is something that indicates that Joe may be coasting or he may be struggling with something and needs some more specific targeted interventions. So looking over at the pass scores for Joe, again, feelings about school, very positive. Perceived learning capability, yes, whilst when you compare this score against some of the other scores, it's a bit lower. Actually, 48.8 is okay as a score. So Joe generally, thinks he's sort of reasonably capable. Again, learner self-regard 55.5. It's not an immediate red flag score. Preparedness for learning. Joe feels, he's prepared for learning. Probably could be a fairly organised student or feel like he has the learning strategies in place to access the curriculum more accurately. Attitudes to teachers, though, particularly in an international school context, this seems very low. So it's important to look here what's going on. This could be just one lesson where Joe's perhaps displaying or not displaying at all a low feeling towards attitude towards teachers. General work ethic 76.8. So Joe understands why he's at school and the point of being at school and working hard. Confidence in learning. So Joe, 75%. Joe is probably a fairly resilient student. But attitudes to attendance is quite low at 18.3. So Joe doesn't always want to be at school, so this would certainly need to be investigated. And response to curriculum 5.2. So Joe doesn't feel that the curriculum really matches his needs. And if we go back to his scores on CAP 4, you can see a possible reason for this may be that Joe is a spatially biased student. So by the very nature of teaching as a profession, it does tend to be a verbally biased profession. So you tend to find more teachers with a verbal bias than a spatial bias. So of course we tend to teach in that way with a verbal bias. So it may be that Joe feels that he's being taught in a way that there's a lot of words used. It may be that he's not being taught in a more visual, spatial way, and therefore feels that the curriculum doesn't really match his needs. So the three components together, you can see how you can start to really investigate some key issues and identify whether a student is underperforming against their true ability. There's a lot of further support available. So there's a number of recorded webinars on our website. We run events in different areas across the world as well, so please do look on the What's On section of our website. Happy to have a call with you over Skype as well if you wish to chat through anything covered by this webinar or anything else to do with assessments on an individual basis. And sample reports can all be found on our website. Our website address is there, as is our email address and phone number as well. So if you have any questions, please do get in touch. Thank you very much for listening to the webinar, the recorded webinar today.